こんにちは。レジデンスについてポッドキャストホームエイジカンバーセーションズへようこそ。私はミュウです。そして日本語がわかりません。
And I'm Mole, and I personally wrecked the residents financially, and I have no regrets about it.
And I'm Rabbit, and where did my eyeball go?
I'm Cat, and they found me in the same dumpster they found Mr. Red.
Our project for today is the 13th anniversary show. The 13th anniversary show came about in October of 1985 and went on until January of 1987. It came after the total financial havoc wrought by the Mole Show, which left the residents in crippling debt, leading them to promise that they would never tour again. Except when their Japanese label asked them to come and perform for the anniversary of the label in Japan, the residents decided to change their tune. But first, let's talk a bit about the residents in Japan.
Take it away, Mew!
Ooh, all right. So everyone knows the residents are practically Japanese, but no one knows.
Well, I mean, who's to say they're not?
I mean, no one knows. But
Who's this no one?
Yeah,
I
I'd
don't
like to
know.
talk to them.
But I've heard they're also from like Louisiana. So who's
Louisiana, Japan. Louisiana is
that's true. Yeah, that's
one of the
true.
lesser-known districts. That's what they're called. Something like that.
Prefectures.
Actually,
Prefectures.
yeah.
Hey,
no.
is no one the lead singer of the residents?
Maybe.
No, that's Odysseus from the Odyssey. Get it? Because he tells the cyclone.
All right,
Just a
but
little
anyway,
classic humor for you.
Yeah, but anyway, the first like real sign of the residents sort of having a Japanese fan base outside of that Satisfaction record, which was kind of not exactly wasn't exactly I feel targeted to Japanese people, was during that whole disappearing residents fiasco prior to the release of Eskimo. This was when the residents like fled prior to the release of Eskimo, and Cryptic had to like chase them down. They put out Not Available because there was nothing else to put out. They gave them a new studio, and apparently at one point the resident went to Japan as part of the story. That entire story kind of seems, it's just part of the residents' mythology, so it's hard to say how 100% true that is, but it kind of makes sense because, the residents did have this deal with their Japanese label, so even if the residents didn't go to Japan, like, right during that whole made-up controversy, it could have been based on real events of them actually going to Japan, or Cryptic going to Japan, or both. Speaking of their Japanese label was called Wave. Wave was a label and a record store. It was a label for the record store, I guess. But that record store was part of a bigger conglomerate of the Seibu department stores, which are big department stores. Wave specialized in what else? New wave music, although they also put out other music, jazz. They put out a lot of foreign, to Japan anyways, artists like the Residents. And they also put out like some familiar names if you're a fan of the Residents. John Zorn, Tuxedo Moon. They put out a lot of like weird, well, I guess not weird. They put out a lot of classic jazz albums. They put out some Thelonious Monk.
I think it's interesting that Tuxedo Moon was on Wave because Tuxedo Moon would later be hosted on Ralph Records.
Yeah. So I feel like there's a lot of overlap. There were Japanese artists on Wave who were just putting out Japanese records, but there was a lot of foreign stuff, especially that sort of like classic jazz. That was a big part of Wave's output, but also some familiar names. The Residents. Shout out to all my Verna Lynch stands out there. But yeah, and Wave put out the Residents albums, including the big ones that were in Japan, George and James, which was pretty successful, and Big Bubble, which was hugely successful in Japan.
Which is interesting because in the Western markets, like, people really hate those two albums specifically.
Yeah, like the only two like legit like Ralph Records put out like used LPs I have from the Residents are George and James and Big Bubble, because like nobody wants them, so it was very easy to find them at my local record store. But like those were super popular in Japan, especially Big Bubble. It was a unusual success.
Japanese have taste.
It is. I think because there was kind of a language barrier. Like, I feel like Big Bubble is kind of a controversial album amongst Resident fans because of the whole presentation.
What,
but especially...
It sort of works because it's like, you know, with like the English speakers, they always could read the lyrics, so they're kind of used to that sort of thing. And then you have the Big Bubble, which is for the first time to English speakers, like, whoa, I can't understand what he's saying. In Japan,
it's inaccessible in a way to English speakers, but if you don't speak English, it doesn't matter if they're not speaking English on the album. But I think it also reflects a shift in attitudes about music, in a regional sense, because experimental music in the United States, really at any point in time, differs wildly from the kind of experimental music happening in Europe or in Japan. And you see this as sort of a sliding scale here, because there's a core set of albums that US fans of the Residents seem to really enjoy, and then there's sort of the European reception of the Residents, which seems to be with more open arms, and then you get the Japanese reception of the Residents, which seems to be even more ahead of the curve and more receptive to the sort of experimental direction the Residents take, really at any point in time, but especially in the 1980s.
I mean, it could be just like, I guess, I don't know, a cultural thing too, because Twin Peaks was also super, super, super crazy popular in Japan. Like, to the point where there's, like, Twin Peaks coffee commercials in Japan, like Kyle MacLachlan, like, drink this coffee, or whatever. So maybe it's just, a cultural attraction to that kind of surrealism that the Residents and Twin Peaks both provide.
Like we, like in the America, we have, like, this association that Japan's really weird and wacky, and, I mean, they are, but there's also this just other, like, sort of artistic appreciation for the surreal. Like, if you see a lot of like Japanese surrealist works, like, I love Japanese surrealist works.
And even their horror is more surreal than non-tangible than anything else. Like Junji Ito specifically comes to mind.
Yeah. So I think that like the Residents kind of appeals to that kind of palette and that sort of just avant-garde new wave sound. Just of the Big Bubble came out at like the perfect time to be hugely successful. Wave also put out a kind of exclusive record because I don't think it's been re-released. I like actually know it hasn't been re-released. It's called Memorial Hits. It's a compilation album that was to sort of prepare for the 13th anniversary show, get people familiar with the Residents a bit more. Which
was at the time known as the Eyeball Show, right?
Yes, it was the Eyeball Show. Like, I know Memorial Hits and the Big Bubble, they came with these hand-transcribed, like, lyric sheets. Like, someone, like, listened to the album and would transcribe the lyrics, which, for the Big Bubble, like, I can't do that in English. I don't know how they managed to do that in Japanese. And for Memorial Hits, I also don't know, because I don't really know what's on that album. But, like, it is a goal of mine to eventually get those releases so I can read the lyric sheets, because I'm so curious, especially about the Big Bubble. Like, you know, I don't even know the lyrics to the Big Bubble, so like seeing such a unique perspective, like trying to interpret it is like so cool.
Yeah, I mean, Wave as a label seemed to be really kind to the residents, and that kindness was probably very much appreciated following the Mole Show, because the financial situation that followed that was probably one of the worst the residents have ever been in.
Yeah.
But because the Wave releases did so well in Japan, it was like there was nowhere else to go for them but to Japan. So when the label asks them to come and perform, it's like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna go to Japan.
Yeah, so apparently Wave was like, hey, you should come perform in Japan. And they're just like, no, we're never touring again. And Wave was like, we will pay all of the expenses. And then at that point, it's just like, well...
Provide instruments, provide shelter, all that. Everything.
Apparently, I think they also paid them on top of that.
Yeah.
Like, plus, like, I guess, I would assume they make money from the shows too. And then they just also got, like, a bonus from Wave. So Wave was just throwing money at them, which, like...
At the time, it was like a blessing, because, they were basically about to fall apart as a band because of what the Mole Show did.
Like, because one thing was, like, the Mole Show was also just really stressful, because it was really big, theatrical, and just a headache. They had, like, all the staff on the show.
So many changes of set, and it was impossible to transport. And so with the 13th anniversary show, they decided, like, to go in the complete opposite direction and have an entirely minimalist show that was focused almost entirely on costumes and was lit by a pair of handheld lights. And compared to the Mole Show, that was a total shift. There are lighting sheets that they had for the specific theatrical lighting that they needed for the shows on that tour, while with the 13th anniversary show, it's a lot more free form. But it seems like they didn't lose anything in terms of mood, because the 13th anniversary show turned out to be just as dark, if not more.
Like, we'll eventually go into more detail on the just adventure the residents had with the Mole Show, but it was just insane, and just like being offered like to have it all covered and everything, like they couldn't turn it down, even if they were still stressed out, I guess, from performing live. Also, just a little bit of trivia about Wave and like their love for the residents. I don't know if this is true or not, but I've seen the residents' official website claimed this, so it's just one of those weird mythical mysteries. Apparently, Wave Records had a statue of the residents made and installed in their office in Tokyo. It's like a bronze statue, and like,
please, what?
There are no pictures of it. There's no pictures of it. I don't know if it's like if it still exists. Like, how big was it? Existed. Like, was it like life size? Was it just like old tiny little like half scale?
Well, here's the thing: scale? I want it in my house to have and to hold and to love and to snuggle.
Like, I don't know if it exists. It was on the official website, so like it. But it also, like, the residents' history is so filled with mystery. No rhyme. Like,
but why would they make that up?
Exactly. It's like so weird. Such a weird detail. I love this about, like, I mean, just the whole 13th anniversary saga is very mysterious to me. But like the residents and their situation and adventures and business in Japan is so fascinating to me, because there's so many weird mysteries that like just like Cryptic or Ralph staff like just wouldn't know, because like they're not in Japan. They weren't constantly monitoring Wave Records, so it's like hazy on the details.
It's like the actual like telling of that story is so glazed over that it's
like, oh, by the way,
they wouldn't even like make that up because it's not part of the story that they're telling.
I don't know. I don't know.
But clearly it shows, whether it's true or not, and the fact that we can believe it, that Wave as a label was showing the real dedication to the residents that they needed at the time. So the Eyeball Show was born, and the residents apparently played 4 shows in Japan.
So they played one in a venue in Kyoto called Kyoto Silk Hall, which I had to go digging for that because it's not on the official website. And then the 3 remaining shows were in the Parco space in Shibuya, Tokyo, Japan.
So obviously that show was more of a normal concert compared to the theatrical and therefore more expensive and stressful Mole show.
Normal, relatively speaking. I mean, this is the residents.
Yeah. In here we're talking like there's a singer, there's someone playing instruments, and Snakefinger is also there. You know, just
the set
hanging
list,
out, I guess.
The set list is just like, here are songs by the residents, rather than them being like, you know what, we're going to tell a story, we're going to have theatrics and a narrator. It's like, no, it's just a fun old, weird old time.
And these shows were pretty successful. And with that, the residents decided to take the 13th anniversary show back to the States. This was all made possible, of course, by some strange 18-year-old named Rich Shoop, who was later called the Wonder Boy by the residents. He arranged for the incredible number of shows all across the United States, and this was during the 13th anniversary show. They visited some locations that they have not gone back to since, which also meant that they played some pool halls and other sorts of shady venues. They went to Kansas. I
mean, 18-year-old,
There was,
scheduling an entire nationwide tour, he tried his best.
He lives up to his name.
There was quite the set of little things that have been written about, too, that happened in some of those shows, like the keyboard overheating. And, there was also, I think, one time when someone ran up on the stage. And then
it was just absolute pandemonium.
It sounds like a typical American residence audience.
There's one big one that we'll get to in a moment, though.
Ooh.
One big problem.
So, after they did the United States tour, or should I talk about the... Well, here. During the United States side of the tour, there was an eyeball theft. One of the greatest crimes in residential history. Oh, I will say it is so.
No. I wouldn't even... I would go so far as to say American history. The
I
greatest
would say
crime in American history.
I would say this eyeball theft...
The most heinous crime in American history.
Of the 13th anniversary tour is probably the second worst crime in American history. The first one being the eyeball theft of, 2014, 2015? Like the one that happened this decade.
That was 2012.
Yeah.
That never
Mr.
got...
Blue, if you're out there, we just want you home.
Hashtag free Mr. Blue.
Bring him home.
Bring him
Bring
home.
our boy home.
Bring our boys back. So after the Los Angeles show, it turned out that someone had stolen Mr. Red from the residents' dressing room.
And
this was completely unacceptable.
And they threw him out of a window into a dumpster.
But of course, after the eyeball was returned, the residents knew it would never be the same. It had been tainted by being touched in unknown ways by someone who was not its owner, because each eyeball was made to fit its wearer and absolutely no one else. So the residents, crafty as always, brought a new character into play. Mr. Skull.
Mr. Skull.
He had a black skull for a head. And we all know him now, but at the time, the residents also introduced a black armband worn by the group during the shows and was also sold at merch tables in memorial of the stolen eyeball.
Yeah, they had the dates of it.
Brings me to tears.
And after that, After that United States side of the tour, the residents decided to take on Australia, New Zealand, and then go all across Europe. Of course, for one of their first shows in Europe, they played in Tromsø, Norway. The issue here was that almost all of their equipment did not arrive in time for the show, so they had to scramble to get new costumes, instruments, and more at the very last minute, so they weren't getting things from like a toy store. But they pulled through, and in true residential fashion, the show was almost as memorable, or even more memorable, perhaps due to their perseverance. And also during the European side of the tour, this is where they first encountered the professor himself, Hein Fokker, who was truly captured by the sights and sounds and is now their tour manager and has been for God only knows how many years.
And he is a very swell lad.
You're 6 feet tall. You would not know. He's a normal height.
How tall is he?
I don't know. I think... I'd say about 5'7".
Wait, what do you think I said? I said swell.
Oh, I thought you said small.
Oh,
Hashtag manlet squad.
Oh yeah, he's a very swell lad is what I said.
Sorry, Sparky, cut out my spurking.
I will not.
I'd like to interject with a side note. So, most people know Mr. Skull as the singer of the Residents after the 13th anniversary show, but in this case he was not the singer. He was actually the keyboard player.
Oh yeah, he was just like on the sidelines because they had a special mystery guest who was doing a lot of singing.
Oh yeah, well, like on Spotify's version of the 13th anniversary tour is actually the American concert, and you know in the introduction they say that one of our guys, our special friends, having a major crisis of, you guys know the thing, it's like a major crisis of identity. So maybe he's still figuring himself out because they have him on keyboards. Don't really know what they're going to do with him yet.
He's multi-talented.
He's also...
Oh, yes, for sure. But he hadn't found his niche quite.
He hadn't found his voice.
There you have it. Boom.
Because he was a skull.
That's why the singing resident's voice changed so much.
We solved it. We solved the mystery. That's why Santa Dog sounds so different.
Just call us meddling kids, because we solved this motherfucking mystery. God damn it!
He was also not called Mr. Skull back then, if I recall correctly. He was called
Mr. Deadeye Dick, which is actually a Kurt Vonnegut reference.
So the format of the show, like I said, had to do with the album. So the part one was Duckstab and Buster and Glenn. Then they went into 1984 era and Mr. the one, the only, the man, the myth, the legend, Steakfinger, and a salute.
Philip goddamn Lithman.
Then they went on to the early days of 1970 through 1977, followed by American composers, and then we've got our intermission for
Elsie.
For Elsie, yeah. I was like, wait. I was worried it's gonna mispronounce that.
I love for Elsie, by the way. It's fun to listen.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really stellar.
Then we go into Walter Westinghouse, and then the commercial album, which is probably why one of my favorite of these. I have ADHD, so it's easy for me to listen to. And then the Big Bubble. So a lot of these were accompanied by costume changes. We've had, the eyeballs, and then Nixon mask with a checkered suit and bow tie. I would have loved to see that. I really like
their Nixon.
It goes their Nixon's better than the real one. But, so you got our Richard Nixon, we've got our eyeballs, then we've got the costume of the lead singer of the Big Bubble, Ramsey. We've got our inflatable skeletons, so, average stuff, average costumes, your typical run-of-the-mill dress up.
Regular stuff.
Regular
wait,
stuff.
I got it. So, the mask itself was just a standard. It actually was not a Richard Nixon mask as commonly thought. It was a old man mask. It was just who's Ben Cooper? Does anybody here know who Ben Cooper is?
I feel like I should.
Yeah.
I'm gonna Google it real quick.
Google Ben Cooper.
Ben Cooper.
The residents are fans of old man masks, though.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how much of this eBay listing is fact, but it sure is not Richard Nixon. But, you know, hey, it could be. Also, there was a bald version of this mask. But they didn't use it. Just thought you all should know that.
There's something about the 13th anniversary show that sounds like weirdly intense to me, even though it's supposed to be more relaxed compared to the Mole show. It's just like the sound of the synths, like it's very kind of spooky and ethereal in its quality. I love it.
There's an intensity to it, a kind of desperation that only comes from being in dire financial straits.
I just want to say Walter Westinghouse, that version is very good because it has Snake Fingers singing in a southern accent, which you haven't heard that yet. You're not truly living yet. Also, they play some interesting songs during this show, depending on the set list, of course. But they should play like "Ships Are Going Down" from Not Available, which hearing a Not Available song live is pretty rare, and I really like that cover version of "Ships Are Going Down." It's very somber and sad. They play what's that song? Eloise.
Yeah, Eloise from the Violinist Fat soundtrack.
Which is very unusual, and also that song is very intense. They even play some Snake Finger songs. They play yes, Eva's Warning. They played also Picnic in the Jungle. There you go.
Both of those I really like on the 13th anniversary. Oh, actually, side note, I think for one of the San Francisco shows, they had Penn and Teller, like both of them this time, come on stage for Eva's Warning, because I think Penn did a little rant, and I think Teller actually...
That sounds about accurate.
Teller actually sang one of the verses.
Teller? Spoke?
Yeah. It's weird.
No, I don't
we
like
all
that.
know Teller is a
that
resident.
That feels fake.
Well, you know what? I'm a resident too, so whatever.
Well, no. The reason why Teller
resident.
The reason why Teller doesn't speak is because people would be able to recognize him as the singer for the Residents.
Oh, shit!
We aren't supposed to know that.
Sorry, cut that out. That's classified information. I apologize for leaking that.
Sparky, you don't know what they'll do to us if we let that information out. Please cut it out.
I love the version of Man's World.
That Man's World cover is so iconic and intense. I mean, it even compared to like the studio version of that, like the type of performance that Singing Resident gives there is like an intensity of emotion that really, I don't know, it would come to be a mark of later Residents releases, just as like that kind of power that goes into that. You don't really find as easily in the works that preceded the 13th anniversary show. But then you also hear it in his vocal style later on, that like screaming, really. But it's good screaming.
I would say, like, a lot of people describe the Residents' discography as sort of like complex minimalism. I feel like the 13th anniversary show, because it is constrained as a live show, really demonstrates that sort of minimalism, but it's so like haunting and powerful at the same time. Like Man's World is their version of it's pretty simple, and the live version's kind of even more simple, but at the same time, there's so much energy put into it. There's so much tension put into it. Speaking of tension, Cry for the Fire.
you just don't find performances like that anywhere else.
You certainly don't.
Like, I would say, like, discovering that footage of them performing live, Cry for the Fire live, is like it's like a pivotal moment for a Resonance fan in this day and age, because it's just so intense. Like, we think of the Residents as these masked, anonymous people, and suddenly there's this very emotional song with this man on stage screaming, and you can see his face. You can just see his face, but at the same time, it's like, you can't?
Yeah, it's like, it's sort of that really good kind of acting where the actor is so deeply submerged in a character that the character is really all you can see.
Exactly.
And I think that is a pretty good way of describing how the Residents preserve their anonymity.
Oh yeah, no, for sure, because a lot of the costumes don't leave much to the imagination, especially later on, I'd say.
Yeah, I could definitely say that about Randy. Am I right, guys? Who's with me?
Randy got down to the muscles.
13th anniversary show, very good, but it also has connections to later Residents works.
Say
because,
what?
yeah, in terms of format, this would end up being kind of what they go for anytime they're not doing a really storytelling-driven performance, or a performance driven by a certain album. So, while this kind of fell to the wayside in the 90s because everything was pretty focused on storytelling, even through Demons Dance Alone live, you can kind of see it with the Icky Flicks live show, Randy, Chuck, and Bob, and of course, with the Way We Were tour in Australia. Way We Were was essentially the 20th anniversary of the 13th anniversary tour, and its set list was very similar with newer songs added in, but replicated, in a way, the feel of 13th anniversary, only now the Residents had money. So I think that was kind of cool.
It's a lot, it's still got that really freaky atmosphere, because it's like, it's almost, you know, in the 80s a lot, it was easier to be scared than it was in the 2000s. So it was kind of amplified in The Way We Were, because now The Way We Were is terrifying. They are screaming a lot.
The Way We Were is very interesting just because it was a lot smaller tour. It was just Australia. I don't know. There's something about like just the limited availability of that
Intimacy.
where it's like, it feels different than 13th anniversary, which has like a billion releases. It's Tokyo, America, Holland, everything.
They still had that minimalism though, because it's like, from what I've seen in the video, the sets were essentially like hung up sheets with lights behind them, and an aluminum ladder that they basically shaped around throughout the songs. Pretty interesting.
So Way We Were was pretty cool. Do we want to talk about other Japanese labels?
Sure. So Wave eventually went defunct. Rest in peace. But the Residents still have fans in Japan who are willing to buy CDs or records or whatever. So there are other labels that exist that distribute the Residents' stuff now. Although, to be fair, like now that we're in 2019 with internets and you know, the need to have like special like record label in Japan taking care of things isn't that crucial anymore. People can just import. But there are at least two labels I know of. There's Birdsong, which put out those little tiny like mini LPs. You know what I'm talking about? Those little CDs that are like mini versions of the LP sleeves, and then you know what I'm talking about?
No.
They're really
are you talking
cute.
about
Oh my
CD
god.
Jackets?
They're these little CDs. They're really cute. They're Japan exclusives, and it's like little CD sleeves that are like designed to be like mini versions of like the like vinyl sleeves. And then when you take the CD out, it's like a reproduction of the like label that would be on the the LP.
Yeah, that is so
they're really cute.
Darn cute.
Really cute.
That's adorable.
Wait, so
I have.
So the CD just slides in and out of it?
Yeah, it's just like one of those like tiny little CD sleeves. It's not like a digipack or whatever.
Yeah.
A friend of mine was telling me that they overheard this guy saying like women love tiny things, like miniature versions of things, and I think Mew gushing over this is proof positive of that.
They're really cute. I have the intermission one. The other thing they have, like the little record sleeve in an LP, like it has a little like paper sleeve around the CD, which is like
like the Obi?
Unnecessary. No, it's like a little what is it? The liner, the liner thing. They have one for the CD, which obviously is pointless.
Oh, that's so cute.
Like most CDs in that format don't have. I should like upload pictures.
Is it kind of like really the preserved editions? How they have those little inner sleeves?
No, it's like an actual like the record sleeve that you put the record in and then you put it in
how they have like
the
I guess the more cardboardish.
The dust jacket thing.
There you go. That's what it's called.
Yeah, it's like, there's like a tiny version of that goes around the CD. It's really cute. And they also do have like an OB and like a little booklet they jammed in there too. Very good. I think you can still buy them. They're kind of cheap. I bought the intermission / census taker one, and they have sort of the kind of classic Residence albums available, so check that out. There's also Bomba.
I was just going to say, I'm kind of surprised a lot of collectors kind of ignore a lot of the Japanese releases, because they're pretty cool.
They're very good. And just also, like, I don't know, I feel like record collectors really love the OB, which is that little paper thing that covers the side of the record or the CD. I don't really know the purpose of it, but it looks cool. And Japanese releases have that.
It's kind of like the hype stickers on the shrink wrap, except you don't have to tear them off.
Yeah, and then then there's Bomba Records, which just also puts out Resident CDs. I don't really know kind of specifics, but they usually just put out sort of regular releases, jewel case, or like really just jewel case CD releases.
I think one of the ones they did was Animal Lover, and from what I've seen, a lot of the collectors usually get that too.
Yeah, like I feel like Bomba is a bit more of a actually known name for record collectors, because they actually did, like, I think Cryptic or the Residents had like some sort of actual more serious deal with Bomba, because Bomba put out like a lot of releases first.
Do you want to talk about how the Residents almost went and played Talking Light in Japan?
So, the Residents played in Japan in the 1980s, and then they never really went back to Japan for any of the other tours. No QB, no Wormwood, no. Nothing of the sort. Definitely no Bunny Boy. But there were plans to maybe take the Talking Light show to Japan in 2011. I mean, I assume that was the tour they were doing in 2011 for a small little Japanese part of the tour. But unfortunately, in 2011, that was when the Tohoku earthquake happened. That was big news. There was the tsunami. There was that Fukushima stuff going down. So that was sort of put on hold. And the Residents would have to go to Japan another day.
And that other day happened to be in 2017 for the world premiere of their In Between Dreams tour. Japanese copies of The Ghost of Hope were also for sale early during this show, so I guess The Ghost of Hope also had its world premiere in Japan. And there were a variety of promotional events in Japan during 2017 as well. There were
also, during 2017, as a sort of lead up, and also after the In Between Dreams shows, there were other promotional events. There was an event called Medama no Gakko, which was just a sort of little, it was like a workshop almost.
The Japanese In Between Dreams set list was a lot more based on the Randy, Chuck, and Bob trilogy shows, perhaps due to the fact that Japan missed those shows and the residents wanted to allow that audience to experience them when they wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And some of these songs stayed on the set list for the US and European tours, but some of them didn't, such as God's Magic Finger and Loser is Congruent to Weed, which, now that we know the instrumentation of In Between Dreams, I would like to hear those. So residents, if you're willing to hit us up. Also, those Japanese shows eventually did get little tidbits of official video released from Tyrone's Snap Spectacles, those Snapchat goggles, and that's about it.
The segment they added for those for the American shows was the Nixon Sings the Blues one, which was sort of to tie into the Dying Dog songs that they added for those tours.
They did, though. They did play Die, Die, Die in the Japan show.
They did, which...
I wonder if it's just because Nixon jokes really don't carry with the Japanese audience.
Now, who is this long-nosed?
Alongside the show, also during 2017, around the time of those In Between Dream shows, to promote those concerts, we had some just interesting promotional events. There was Medama no Gakko, which is, it translates to like the school of eyeballs, because it's the residence. And that was just a little, like, it was almost like a workshop. It was hosted by a man named Manabu Iwasa, who has worked with the residents a lot in sort of bringing their stuff over to Japan. And essentially, he talked about the history of the residents. Which, by the way, who would want to listen to someone talk about the history of the residents?
Who cares, you know?
Freaking stupid.
He showed like footage, and weirdly enough, there's like a weird like music production element to the entire event. Like, they were sort of playing around with like weird ways of making music, I guess, which I guess makes sense. Related to that, there's also a live stream with that they did that was basically a cut down version of Medama no Gakko. That was a stream with Domune, which was just, it's like this club where they stream stuff at. It's weird.
I know,
but
it's weird.
That was pretty cool too. You got to see the entire Resonance collection, and we might link that stream in the show notes because it's very cool. And also, I was in the studio audience when that was being recorded. So that was fun. And then also throughout 2017, there's the localization of Theory of Obscurity, which had a lot of merch that I really wanted and couldn't get. I want the clear file. But they had like all this. They had a Resonance Gachapon. I want.
There's an interesting thing that I noticed. Actually, I was wearing that Theory of Obscurity shirt when I was when I met Mama Ralph, and she noted that she actually had never seen that shirt. So the Japanese Theory of Obscurity crew essentially operated totally separately from the U.S. crew. And something about that is just very funny to me.
Yeah, by the way, the the localized title was called Medamaron.
What does that mean?
It's like Theory of Eyeballs or something like that. Not as cool as Theory of Obscurity, but gotta mark it, gotta put in the eyeballs.
My girlfriend.
So maybe we're not so
like,
different
What's
after
that
all.
movie you wanted to watch? Wanted me to watch Theory of Obscurity, and I was like, yes. Oh, that's the one.
There's a
Watch
there's
it.
a
There's
a interview with Wave where they're actually interviewing Homer Flynn, speaking for the residents, and also the residents are there goofing off, and like they have trouble translating Theory of Obscurity, and they ask him about the strategy of obscurity. So I think they're just like, yeah, maybe we should just remove the obscurity part and just mention the eyeballs instead.
Seems like a good plan. So I guess that pretty much wraps up our 13th anniversary discussions. Any extra thoughts?
The residents are good. Thank you, Japan, for the residents.
Really, thank you, Wave Records for saving the residents, because like if they didn't just throw money at them to do the 13th anniversary show, like I don't know if the residents, they probably could have just slowly rose back up to financial success from just staying in the studio, but like the fact that they were able to just immediately go on tour very successfully kind of saved them, even though Wave themselves did not survive.
I was just gonna add really quick that it's not exactly from the 13th anniversary, but I think they noted on their site that Man's World, which was made around the same time as the 13th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken, that was the closest to mainstream success that they had ever gotten.
It's the closest to mainstream music they've ever made, at least up to that point. The 13th anniversary version of Man's World and the In Between Dreams version of Man's World sound very similar. Obviously there are differences, but like I like to think that the In Between Dreams version was inspired by the 13th anniversary version.
Seeing that Iki's guitar playing seems to sound a whole lot like Snake Fingers in that, it seems like it probably is an homage, and it works exceptionally well.
Live from Muse Bedroom, this is Muse News, winner of the 2019 award for Best Residence-Related Podcast Segment, 1 year running. Now, our hostess and anchor, Mew.
Welcome to Muse News to use, if you choose. So, here's the news. Somebody's broken out of Satellite 2. The residents. So, in continuation of the last episode's news segment, Psychophon Records did release the Diane Dog Alvin Snow box set release. If you were in suspense for this whole time, I was able to get my copy of the black edition. It is very cool. There are still some copies up, I think, so not of the black one, but of the albino release. So if you've got money and you want to spend it on random stuff, that's cool. Maybe do that, or save your money, because there's a bunch of other stuff in this news segment you can also spend your hard-earned quankaroonies on. But speaking of Diane Dog, the new Residence album has been sort of more formally announced, which has to do with that release of the Alvin Snow Records, demo records. The new Residence album, Metal, Meat and Bone, the songs of Diane Dog, will be sort of the Residence own cover versions of those original demos that will be releasing in February 2020. The Residence and the Cryptic Corporation produced a cool little documentary about the life of Alvin Snow, so maybe check that out. We'll link it in the show notes for you to watch if you haven't watched it already, which you should have, but in case you haven't, because it's kind of long. pop some popcorn, grab a cold beer, watch that 8-minute YouTube video. Oh, it'll be some fun. All right, here's the news, folks. It is crowdfunding season once again in the Residents world. Every couple of years, it seems now, the Residents, they launch a new crowdfunding campaign. A couple years back, it was I'm a Resident. A couple years before that, it was the Theory of Obscurity Indiegogo campaign. I'm sure if it had existed back then, there would have been a Bunny Boy crowdfunding campaign. That's my take on that situation. But we have a new one now, and it's for a exciting future performance. God in 3 Persons live in New York City. So if you're free, on January 24th or 25th of 2020, maybe start looking up some flights to the Big Apple City in New Amsterdam and just have a family-friendly time watching God in 3 Persons live. But you can contribute to the little Indiegogo campaign to sort of help fund whatever they need to do. They have a little video explaining all the crazy stuff they're going to do. So you can contribute. Back in the I'm a Resident crowdfunding campaign, one of the backing rewards was a clothing set which featured Residents branded socks. And I didn't contribute to that campaign, and not getting those socks is my life's biggest regret so far. But if you're like me, you can undo this by contributing to the God in 3 Persons Indiegogo campaign right now. Picking up, the new Resident socks that they include in this campaign. There's also a bunch of other cool stuff. There's shot glasses, because I guess if you want a double shot of whatever, you can do that. There's some other rewards if you're, a 1%er or something, and you can get props, or an executive producer credit, or you could have gotten a Santa dog, but that sold out, so you can't get it anymore. But hey, maybe there'll be new stuff. That'll be running for about another month, so you still have a lot of time to contribute, to scrounge up some quankaroonies this month. Give the Residents a few buckaroonies, and hey, you get a poster or CD or something. Help the Residents achieve their dreams. But we're not done yet, folks. Buried under all this God in 3 Persons Indiegogo stuff is a brand new work by the artist, you should know him, Steven Serio. Oh, Disfigured Knight. Ooh. Fantastic. But Steven Serio, he's putting out a new comic book all about the Residents. It's called Fresh Hell and Fits, a falsified history of the Residents. I'm been told it's 100% true. There will only be 333 copies of this, according to the news. So pick that up. 33 of those copies are special collector's editions. So if you're a super collector, there's only 33 collector's editions. They might be sold out already. I did not check, and I'm not going to. That's a surprise for you folks. But otherwise, if you just want the normal one, if you just want a cool comic book to read, there are 300 normal ones for you to pick up, if you so choose to do so. And finally, we've had a date for Not Available Preserved Edition for quite a while now. That's coming out in a few days, so if you haven't pre-ordered it yet, maybe you should do so, or get ready to pick it up in your local record store if they sell Resident CDs like mine does. Whew. That's coming out November 8th, though, so, pre-order it, get ready to buy it, whatever you do. But as I've said before, it must never be listened to, so, I'm going to bury mine in my backyard and never listen to it. I think Ensenada would be proud. And that's going to do it for this edition of Muse News. Thank you for tuning in. I don't know if this is going to be a recurring segment or not, but that's it for this episode.
And I think with that wraps us up. So it's time for our comment from a Residents video. Live from the basement 4 years ago says, OMG, it sounds like he's crying. How does he do that?
Vibes Pack 3 years ago said, by crying?
Live from the Basement 3 years ago says, now that I think about it, you're probably right. So be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Google Play Music and all that other newfangled technology. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, Facebook. Email us if you feel so inclined. And thanks to the Crypto Corporation and the residents and Sparky.
And Hein.
Love you, Sparky.
And
Love you,
Wonder
Hein.
Boy.
And Japan.
Love you, Wonder
This
Boy.
one goes out to Japan.
Yes.
And
Shout out to Japan.